is there such a thing as too queer or too much queer representation, or is art getting too gay and blah 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 blah? I don't think so, because honestly, who cares? Too many people care about something so small and minute as just people enjoying fiction in a different way from them, or people expressing their own lived experiences through art in a different way than they experience life. It is stupid. Every time I see someone say, oh, diversity and queers, they ruined this thing and da-da-da, they should like stay in their lane and make their own thing. But then when they make their own thing, they go, oh, well, this is too much diversity and da-da-da, this is just pandering, blah 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 blah. And then you're just kind of sitting there like, you don't want them to make their own thing, you don't want them to join the things that you enjoy, you just want them to be silent and to sit to the side because you don't understand why they can't just enjoy your specific perspective of life and everything that you've been able to project and enjoy through all these other different sources of media. So most of the time we have seen games that have a straight white male protagonist. That is usually what it is, and I'm bringing this up because games are a form of art in my opinion, and probably the opinions of many people. But that has kind of been the main protagonist, even through books and, drawings and art pieces throughout the ages. It's usually straight men are usually the center point. Race can also come into this as well, but I am white, so I will stay in my lane and not talk about that. But I am queer and I am disabled, so I can talk about those things. But when we talk about things becoming too queer and shit like that, is it really too queer, or are you just uncomfortable with seeing the world in a different way than you've already seen it? Like, genuinely, I try to have more conversations with people who have this mentality. Like, sadly, some of my own family members have this mentality, so it's really hard for me and a lot of, like, the queer family members to kind of have to deal with this. But I try to have these conversations because I know some people really take it to heart, and I used to be one of those people who took it to heart. But at this point in my life, like, I genuinely like myself. But I could not get to a point where I would have genuinely liked myself if I had not gone through my queer experiences. And my queer experiences probably would have been a lot worse if I did not have art to turn to, if I did not have the queer community, if I did not start to see representation of myself in media. Like, I remember I saw, like, my first ever, like, non-binary character in media when I was, like, I guess just graduating high school, I think is, like, the first time I really saw someone who was, like, non-binary on screen, and I was like, oh. And then I was thinking about it, I was like, oh shit. And then, like, me realizing, oh, hey, I can like girls, and I can like guys, and I can like people in between, and I can also just not want sex. And finding labels for that was such an instrumental point of my life, but so was art. And a lot of the times I started mixing my art with my queer experiences, because at the end of the day, art is a way to express yourself. And a lot of queer people are in fact artists, because that is a way to express yourself and to really kind of hone into who you are as a person, is through art. So when I see people say something like, oh, well, art is getting too queer, or media is getting too queer, and blah 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 blah, it's really interesting to think about what is really going on behind there. Is it because they just don't want to see queer people, or is it because they legitimately think having more queer characters is taking away from something from them? And that is one thing I have never quite understood until kind of recently, because I was looking at one of my family members, I will not name names, but I was like, why do they always just seem to just go further and further into hating people who are different than them? It's not like they have an ego all the time, or like that they necessarily are a narcissist. So I was like, what is it specifically? And then I realized they hate themselves so much that they need to hate someone or something more. And that is the only way they can get serotonin and dopamine, is because they feel so lousy about themselves and so low about their own self-image that they need to drag down other people and other groups to lift themselves up. And I know this isn't like a new concept, but I really started looking at this particular family member from that perspective, and I was like, holy shit. And I've slowly been watching them get worse and worse and worse throughout the years. And then I realized, oh, when more queer characters are introduced and you decenter the male characters from like the story, even just like a little bit, like with Arcane, most of the characters that were like really prevalent to the story kind of were male, like especially like Jason Victor and their whole like storyline. Those were like the main storyline, really. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, now that we're kind of moving past having to have like the male character be the center of attention at all moments, especially like straight male characters at the center, and with fandom 2 headcanoning that certain male characters aren't in fact straight or cis, a lot of the times these people who feel so lousy about themselves, they project themselves onto these characters so they can feel that they are living through it. And realizing that they are literally actually feeling a sense of loss is kind of mind-boggling, because honestly, it doesn't take away from them, it adds to someone else. But then they also are like, I just don't like how forced it seems and da-da-da, and like I don't want it shoved down my throat. But then they'll watch the same movie with the same premise 4 times over, and I think they don't like unpredictability, because they don't know what it is like to live the queer experience. Oh, poor cat. Yeah, they don't know what it's like to live the queer experience. They don't know anything outside their own misery, and to know that other people can go through the same sort of misery, how are they supposed to put down them and feel better about themselves when they know that they're going through sometimes the same fucking shit? A lot of the times, it is just self-loathing that leads people to hating others, because it is the only way you can derive any sort of serotonin sometimes. Like, when I was in middle school, I think, I was honestly utterly a fucking cunt. I was just a piece of shit. I had lost my dad and 2 friends in the same year, and my entire like world kind of flipped on itself, and also my health was declining, and so much shit was just stacking on top of each other and on top of each other. So I did in fact take it out on other people, and I pushed most people away, and it was awful, and I felt bad and da-da-da, but I felt almost justified in hurting other people because of my own misery. Like the saying, misery loves company and shit like that. But I realized, I think end of 8th grade, beginning of 9th grade, like through that summer as well, when my health was taking even more of a turn. I had went through a growth spurt, and I was 5'6" and 72 pounds, and my doctor said that I should not be alive. My journey also with figuring out that I was queer in that like section of time, I probably would not have made it as far as I did without just the media and stuff like that I was able to get my hands on, and I found comfort in fandom and fan fiction and art. Like, I made so many comics from middle school all the way through high school that are no longer on the internet, and I have no art from it anymore because my computers that I made them on completely just ate itself because they were old, like refurbished Dell computers, and I was running way too many programs on them. That's besides the point. But I had a story that I called The Weirdos, and it was on Tapas, and I had also Comic Fury way back in the day, but that was a different iteration of it. But it was about just a group of different teenagers from all different backgrounds that were like queer and stuff like that, all kind of being the weirdos. And it was cringy and stuff like that, but it went into like how I was feeling and trying to kind of identify what I was feeling and process it through a third party. And honestly, like, a lot of people do that. But in doing it through a third party, it became easier for me to digest those hard feelings that I couldn't really digest any other way. I couldn't digest them physically for me, like, through myself, if that makes sense, or through my POV. I had to literally separate it before I could be like, okay, this is what I'm feeling, this is why, and then develop it. But I think other people who are saying, oh, this is too queer, and da-da-da, they don't want to relate to queer stories, because then that means they have to humanize them. And in humanizing them, that will make them feel lower about themselves, because they barely view themselves as human. They have to put down other people to view themselves as more human, to make an other so they're not that bad. But then when they start to realize, oh, hey, they're just people, I can even relate to this is kind of weird, then they start to feel lower about themselves, because they're like, oh shit, well, if they're just people, what the fuck am I? Because they already feel less about themselves. So they're dehumanizing themselves and others to try and make themselves feel and be more human, because they're like, oh, well, I'm not as bad as this group of people, so I am better. So I am good. And then it gives them the false sense of bravado and ego, and that's why some of them even seem to have like narcissistic tendencies. But then when you actually peel back all those layers, they're actually just really sad, self-conscious individuals. And when I say sad, I'm not even just like saying that to be mean or cruel or anything like that. I am saying that because genuinely it does make me sad that some people think that they do need to bring down other people to lift themselves up. Because I remember being there and it sucked. It honestly sucked so much. And living through that, even just for, I think, how many years would that be? Like 2-3 years? I don't know the exact time frame, but I was also going kind of back and forth with old patterns all throughout high school as well, because I had a lot of health issues and I was dealing with depression and anxiety and so many family issues, and also being asexual on top of all of that, and realizing that like I might not ever find a different person who will accept me for being asexual, because at that point I also didn't know I was non-binary. Going through puberty was also not the greatest. So I had all these different things happening, and I used escapism and art to basically make me keep going. If I had no way to express myself and absolutely no media with any representation, I probably would have killed myself. Like, legitimately. And I know that's the same for a lot of other people. So when people say something like, oh, this is too queer, but then it's just a few queer characters that are in the plot, or their queer identity is a part of the plot. Hello, Kitty, what's the matter? It's very disheartening knowing that so many people think that, but then at the same time, I have to remember, hey, it's actually not personal. It is about them, not you. And it sucks that you have to kind of step back to think about that, because it hurts and you kind of want to be able to feel, hey, that hurt. But it's still just a weird kind of thing that you have to deal with, because it's a paradox, because it's not technically personal, but it feels personal, and also it becomes personal because they are attacking who you are, and they are radicalizing and just seeming to fight against you. They're radicalizing politics against you and your identity, and we've come so far, and yet we keep making steps backwards for queer people. Like, I remember when I was a kid and gay marriage was legalized, and I was like, oh wow. And then people in my family were like, this isn't good, but then my mom and dad were like, yeah, this is great. Or I think my mom, because my dad already died by then, but yeah, my mom was like, yeah, this is great. And I was a little queer back then, who came out, I think, 2 years prior to it, and I was like, oh wow, my mom's actually accepting. But then slowly things kind of get a little difficult throughout the years, you know? But without specific representation, people aren't seen. And when people aren't seen, it is easier to try to erase them. And that leads to a bunch of different political stuff that I will try to kind of steer a little away from, even though art itself is political. I made a video about that, or a podcast episode, whatever the fuck this is, but art is political. Life is kind of political. Art is life. Art mimics life. And life itself has queer people in it. So you can't really erase queerness from art, and you can't erase life from art, because then you get soulless AI stuff. And then that just feeds the billionaires and lines their pocket instead of community. But also, with this idea that, oh, things can be too queer happening, that is also just propaganda pushed onto people, so we keep fighting each other instead of, hey, this person right here has $1 billion because they used slave labor. They used freaking and they used stolen goods. They did this and this and this and this horrible thing. And they're not paying their workers. And blah, 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 blah. They're doing this sketchy business practice and this sketchy business practice. If we're too focused on hating each other, we don't know who is actually pulling the strings and making our life worse. Because you can be like, oh yeah, queer representation is ruining art and video games and media and stuff like that. Or you can be, hey, greedy corporations are not allowing writers to actually take the time to fully flesh out plot lines and stuff like this, but we're just gonna blame it on the queer characters instead. But that doesn't really make sense now, does it? Because any character that is fully fleshed out can be a great character, but if you rush the writers, if you rush the artists, if you don't give them enough funds, if you do this, that, and the other to just stifle their creative process, you're not going to get a good outcome. And then instead of being like, oh yeah, this freaking corporation ruined this game. They're like, oh no, the queers ruined this game. And I keep saying games because I'm thinking about specifically Dragon Age the Veilguard, even though honestly, it was kind of a solid game. Like, the pacing was and some of the writing was a little less than adequate, in some places. But again, that is due to the corporation of EA not giving them the proper funds or time and constantly trying to make them insert a live service to it, and also trying to control the freaking where it's going and laying off like so many people from that team. Like, I have the art book, and half of the art book is about like 2 different projects that were originally what Veilguard was supposed to be, and most of even Veilguard's like concept in that book, some of it's not even in the game. So they had all these ideas and all these iterations, and due to the corporation, the game became lackluster. But even so, it is still a solid game. Like, the mechanics are fun, the game itself is pretty fun, and there were some points that literally had me tearing up and crying because of the beautiful writing. But there is some lackluster stuff. Like, Act 2 completely is lackluster because it is only the character companion quest. That is it. There is nothing really else to do in Act 2. And then Act 3 is very short, but Act 3 is beautiful, so I would not change Act 3 at all. Act 1, I would beefing it up a little bit, and Act 2, I would beefing it up. But Act 3, perfect. But people are blaming Veilguard's failure, I say with quotation marks. They're blaming it on all of the queer representation, and honestly, Veilguard's writing of just the queer experience was really well done. And the one thing I will say is Tosh being non-binary, I love it. I love all the non-binary options, but the word non-binary comes from computer coding. They don't have computers in Dragon Age, obviously, so if they had just made a different word that meant non-binary, it would have been perfect. I would have no notes at all on that front. Like, even if they just said, yeah, I don't really feel like a boy or a girl, I think I'm just gonna use they, them because it's gender neutral, that would have been fine. But that is literally one little tiny thing. That is one note I have about the queer representation. But so many people focus on it, and specifically Tosh as a character. And Tosh, honestly, is a really unique and, in my opinion, well-developed character. And there's really only like 2 things about their storyline that I was a little on. But considering how many other Dragon Age games where sometimes you are listening to characters talk and you're just like, what the fuck? Like Dorian from Dragon Age Inquisition defending slavery. That was weird, but no one really talks about that. Or freaking hello Phantom. But yeah, I'm not gonna go through every game and talk about like weird choices they made. Sorry if you can hear the cat. But there are so many different things that people can latch onto, but they latch on to Tosh because this is something that they can try to hate on and da-da-da, and all of the times they're like, oh, why are they so aggressive and da-da-da, and honestly, they're not really. They're blunt, and they can kind of be a hothead, but it's not like unjustified, and most of the time they're just chilling. But one thing that gets lost a lot of the times because people aren't playing the game is Tosh is one of the youngest characters. They're like in their early 20s, so like maybe 20, maybe even 19. Like, I don't know how old Tosh is supposed to be, but they are young. So their whole thing is self-discovery and stuff like that. And one of the screenshots that people constantly do to like mock them and to like be like, oh yeah, this is just an angry non-binary character and blah 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 blah. And there's definitely some racism kind of put into all of that as well, but I cannot talk on that because I am just a white person and I'm staying in my lane, which is the queer lane. But they use this one frame of Tosh and it's of them screaming, and they're like, why are they so angry and blah blah blah. But if you actually watch the scene, the voice actor in that moment, holy shit, rent was due, and they should have gotten paid overtime, because that part, I literally started tearing up at that part, because it wasn't even anger, it was genuine, like, gut-wrenching sorrow and grief in that moment. And people lose that because they're not actually looking at Tosh as a complex character. They're looking at Tosh as the token non-binary character and blah 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 and this queer character, and they're not actually looking into the care that was actually taken to make that character. They're not looking into the actual character because they've already written it off. And that's something that we need to somehow figure out a way to get people to like stop judging things just because it has queer people in it. But at the end of the day, I don't know, I just kind of work here. It's kind of funny that I say that. I keep saying that because I heard one TikToker say it, and now I'm just here repeating it, but I work from home, so I literally do work here. I do just work here. But yeah, again, when people just kind of try to focus on specific things being like, oh, well, this failed because it's too gay, and this failed because freaking it's too gay. It's not actually because it's too gay, it's because it was poorly written or drawn or so on and so forth, and that can be blamed usually on corporations. Or, you know, them being actual children and let children write shitty fan fictions and shitty stories and make shitty comics, because that's how they get better. I don't know if people need to tell other people this more or what, but if I see one more person complain about a child's OC or drawing and saying that it is too anything, I will karate chop you in the head, because let that child be cringe. Children need to be more cringe. Why are they at Sephora? Anyways, that was such a side tangent, but queer art needs to be a thing, and queer people need to be in art, because art imitates life. And hey, queer people are not going away because they've been here since the dawn of time, and they are in every single, like, what is it? I think it's like 85% of the species on Earth have queer, like, relationships in them, or gay or homosexual relationships in them. And then there's even things like freaking clownfish that are just kind of gender fluid. They go, oh, we don't have a woman now, I am suddenly a woman. It's hilarious. And by hilarious, I mean just like an icon, you know? But people try to paint things in black and white, and it's never black and white. It's literally like all the colors of the rainbow, because freaking even gray is an oversimplification of how diverse life is. And when you try to just dumb it down to black or white, people, one, get lost, two, you will never fit into that black and white thinking. There will always be something about you that makes it so you don't fit in it, because no one can fit into this perfect idealized version of just like male, cis hetero, white man, you know, or female, cis hetero woman, you know, white woman. No one will perfectly fit into that category of those traditions and those values 100%, and the more you try and force that shit, the more you get hurt and the less you even value yourself. So just by accepting others, you get to accept yourself and all your flaws and your quirks and just what makes you different. Like, we can also throw in disabilities at the very end here, because I'm getting a little rambly towards the end, but even disabled people kind of go through the same thing where it's like, oh, well, why do we need someone with a prosthetic? Because people sometimes have prosthetics, and you know what? Being disabled is the one community, like marginalized community, that you can join at any moment. A car crash, freaking hell, even you just abusing your body a little too much, you can be disabled tomorrow. You don't fucking know. But just accepting others is a way you can then go and accept yourself in the future. And one way to do that is just allowing queer art to exist, and for allowing queer people to be in art. And good day.